Hi fam, it's Dylan's mum Deborah. This is Dyl Friends.
Oh my God, we've killed Michael Jordan's dad.
I won the first Brownlow. The problem with that was I wanted it again.
Hey Jared, delete the tweet.
No, we're not here to break news.
This is an exclusive.
It's so silly looking back on for me because I remember just feeling like I'm not needed.
I couldn't, in my wildest of dreams, imagine that we would win the flag at the end of the year.
Damo's a lot funnier than people give him credit for.
Hugely funny.
But Andrew, a little message came across his phone and it was, give Job his Brownlow back.
Paul, how you going?
Very good indeed.
Thank you so much for coming in, mate. That's amazing conversation. Very excited for today's chat.
I better not screw it up then.
No, you won't. Hey, I've got to go to my notes for this because I don't like to, but I've got to remember them all because I don't want to do disjustice. Neuroscientist, physiologist,
yeah.
nutritionist, and currently completing a PhD in applied physiology as well. Psychology, sorry.
And that has now been submitted and is currently getting assessed. So, all being well, in a couple of months I'll be Dr. Paul Taylor. And that's the last bit of the jigsaw for me.
What's your favourite of them, or do you feel that they all work so well together?
They all work together. My first master's was in exercise science, exercise physiology. Then I did another master's in nutrition while I was still in the armed forces. And then I studied neuroscience because I realised when I left the armed forces, became a physiologist and nutritionist over here actually, and realised that actually it wasn't about telling people what to do. It was about helping them with behaviour change. So I went back to uni and studied neuroscience. And then the psychology thing has always been there. And then I thought, you know what, I want to get a PhD and I'd like to be in psychology. So that's been an interesting journey. But it's now being assessed. So we'll see how we go.
Man, I'm geeking out today already. I've got so many things to talk to you about and ask you about because I suppose even myself and maybe a lot of the listeners that listen to this show probably at an age that I've heard you talk about before, around that 30 years old, where you can really, for lack of a better term, use it or lose it. And it's not just physical, but it's that whole holistic side of health around, your mental health, physical health, what you're putting into your body, all those things. And I think literally the last 6 months for me becoming a dad, 2 years, becoming a dad, and having my own setbacks with injury, mental, all those things, you just realize how connected the body is. And it's just so important to stay on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly in your teens, you're so full of ideas and stuff that you want to do and plans and stuff like that. And 20s tend to be a lot of fun as well. I remember having a shitload of fun in my 20s. And then life gets a bit more serious in your late 20s, and then often kids come along and that then just throws extra stuff on you, getting more responsibility at work and all of this stuff. And often people are looking going, Jesus, where's all the fun gone? And it's just stress and bills and hassle and trying to do kids then and stuff. So a lot of people really start to struggle getting into their 30s. And then when people hit their 40s, hormones go haywire and it can really slide pretty quickly. And we see that in the data as well, and in both people's physical health and their mental health. I think it's early intervention for me is really, really key, and there are a number of things that we need to be doing to look after both our physical and our mental health. And I don't actually separate those two things out.
Yeah,
I think
me neither.
There's
Now
a false dichotomy, right? And it goes all the way back to the time of René Descartes, the philosopher who talked and mathematician who talked about dualism, and that the mind and body are separate entities, and it's complete and utter nonsense.
Amazing. So keen. Got so many questions to get to, but I think giving a bit of context as well to your journey and how you got here would be amazing. So in the Navy, joined the Navy while you were in Ireland?
Yeah. So I was an Irish Catholic who joined the British Armed Forces. Not many of us around, but I'd been to university, done a degree, went and travelled around the world, came back, did a master's degree. And it was when I was doing my master's, I thought, I want to, because I'd done a lot of traveling, I just wanted something a bit more exciting. So I went and joined the armed forces and ended up flying helicopters, doing anti-submarine warfare for a few years, hunting submarines for a living, and then got, I think, the best job in the armed forces, which was doing helicopter search and rescue in the mountains and islands of Scotland. That was, look, I describe it probably as 50% excitement, 30% boredom, and 20% terror. So, but it was such a great experience, the whole armed forces thing, and particularly the search and rescue. I absolutely loved my time in the armed forces, but I realized that it was a young single man's game, and I would have ended up doing a lot of sea time, and I wanted to settle down and have a family and do lots of other stuff rather than just spend my entire career in the armed forces.
What was the joining criteria like to get into the armed forces? Is it quite a strenuous program to get through?
So I joined as an officer.
Yeah.
So you have to have a degree to join as an officer, and then for the Navy, you've got to actually go and do the Admiralty interview board. Mm-hmm. And look, originally I applied to join the Royal Marines and got accepted as an officer for the Royal Marines Commandos. Mm-hmm. And it was me and my mate who both got accepted at the same time. We were at uni and we went traveling, and we were in Australia. My liaison officer wrote to me and said, actually, I forgot to put your papers in. And you've now missed, I was supposed to be joining the May batch, and you've missed it. And he was very apologetic, as you can imagine. So my mate came home, went and became a Royal Marines officer, and I was like, shit. And he said, look, you're in the next batch, which is September. But because I was quite late, I think I was turning 25, and that was the cutoff. And he said, you're in, but if they get more than enough people qualifying or passing the Admiralty interview board, you're going to be first off the list because of your age. Wow. And that's what ended up happening. So I was absolutely gutted. And he said, look, why don't you think about joining the Navy? And I was like, I'm not interested in joining the Navy. And he said, well, you could be Navy Aircrew and you could end up, flying with the Royal Marines, doing that. So I thought, oh, okay, that might be quite interesting. So I went and applied, and actually, I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did in retrospect.
Is it to do, or I can imagine the marine testing as well, to get through to that, to actually get through and be in,
yes,
and then not actually get to do it. It would have been a hard sort of pill to swallow.
It was a hard pill to swallow, but I just had to quickly switch my focus because there's no point crying over spilt milk, right? It was done. It was outside of my control, and I thought, well, I just need to move forward. So, what else do I do?
A big part of your story, whilst we're obviously in it, is about putting yourself under stress, the growth that comes from that. I suppose adversity along the way and facing all these things. Do you think that you talk about that period there? A lot of people can find that situation and either get bitter or get better and find the next thing. Did you consistently have that? Do you think, at that age, or was it something you had to learn through that period?
I think it was a bit of both.
Yeah,
actually, I was always, pretty determined, and I think sport really helped with that. I played soccer was my sport, and you learn a lot through sport, as you will know. You learn a lot of life lessons and stuff like that, and the hard physical training to try and be your best and overcoming setbacks and things like that. And I think also growing up in Northern Ireland as a Catholic, I was from a mixed marriage in Northern Ireland, which is a very different connotation in Northern Ireland than anywhere else, right? Yeah. So my dad was a Catholic, my mum was a Protestant. Wow. They got married. My mum had to change religion to get married, but we were brought up as Catholics, but always lived in Protestant neighbourhoods. Which was reasonably resilience building. Yeah. When you are going to school in a Catholic uniform through a Protestant neighborhood, it builds your resilience a bit over time. So, and that's that whole, that which does not kill us makes us stronger, as long as it's not too extreme, right? And that's the thing. It's exposure to manageable stress is absolutely critical for building resilience and what I actually talk about now, which is hardiness, which we'll probably get into. Please. But I think there's a combination of nature and nurture, and a bit of inherent determination. And I think I learned a lot traveling around the world. Mm-hmm. I visited a lot of third world countries India had a big impact on me, traveling for 3 months there in 1995. And realizing just how hard other people have it tends to give you a sense of gratitude. And one day I met a guy who had leprosy and elephantitis, and I never forgot it. And I said to myself, after I'd met him, I gave him some money, he was begging, and I said to myself, just never forget this guy, ever. And every time you're feeling sorry for yourself, just remember this guy. And I consciously remind myself of him and all the adversity that I've seen in third world countries, because it then gives you a sense of gratitude for what you have, and the things that could otherwise be big setbacks, you realize, this is just a little blip, really.
It's a big one, isn't it? Especially you're talking about times of like age and where you're at in your life, and traveling, all those things can help broaden your horizons and perspective on a lot of things. Because I know we're chatting a little bit off before about, I was giving my sort of backstory, and as a young man, like 16 to 21, I was the main character of my own story. No one else had anything else going on besides me. And,
it's the center of the universe,
you're
right?
just like, well, how? But this is my problem. No one has it like I do. And I think the bigger that, I look at it now and think, fuck, you idiot. Like, you are such an idiot. Like, how did you do that? But I suppose without growing through those and the stress, I suppose, that you talk about, which we'll talk a bit about soon, is just so important. And with those moments now that you're talking about, I can already picture, people will be listening, picturing hopefully those moments that have been stressful, but they look back now and go, thank fuck that happened, because I've got through it.
100%. And my daughter, who's 19, she's now at Melbourne Uni, she took 3 months off and went traveling through Asia. And I saw a massive change in her and a big, she was always pretty switched on and she dealt with stress pretty well through sport. She competed in karate and kumite, which is combat, which I think really toughened her up. But I definitely noticed a shift in her outlook, having backpacked through Southeast Asia for a few months. And I think it should be absolutely mandatory that everybody who's brought up, I often talk to my kids about being brought up in the bubble, within the bubble, within the bubble. I think Australia is a bubble country. I think if you're born and bred in Australia, you need to go and see the world, particularly third world stuff. I live in Mount Eliza in the Mornington Peninsula, which is just a bubble of a place. And my kids go to beautiful schools with great teachers. And I've always said to my kids, you're brought up in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. Right? But not to put them down, just to help them realize that there's a whole heap of stuff out there.
For sure.
And that's why we tend to go on holidays to third world countries, or second world countries at least, to just expose our kids from an early age to just what the differences are. And I've always said to them, don't feel guilty about it, but I want you to use the advantages that you have.
Bloody oath. I probably came to a little bit of a similar thing recently, and I like to think of it in sport. I don't know in soccer if they use this as much, but like heat maps on the ground.
Yeah,
so,
a lot. Yeah.
So I always think about like where you've been on the globe and like, the main areas. And
I like that.
I used to think like when I was around a similar age too, I'd spent this heat map. If you look at a globe, like where was it and where had I spent my time, and was just embarrassed about like it was literally in a 10-kilometre radius of where I was, and most things had just sort of happened around me. And even though, you move around and go to different states, like nothing had sort of happened until I was delisted and had to move to Sydney, which was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I didn't have people around me anymore to just come and help out. Mum come over and do the washing, all those things.
Nobody there to save you.
Again, and Sydney's not a third world country, obviously, but within your means, I'm not making it out that I was slumming at all, but it's a rite of passage of growing up, and I think I'll be definitely putting my kids, helping them to try and do that sort of thing and just spread your wings.
And mate, I love this concept of heat map. I'm going to use that.
You can have that one.
I will.
It's yours.
Yeah,
okay, claim it as your own.
I'm going to use that. That is very cool. Your life experience.
Well, imagine going back at yours now. You were saying before the places you've travelled, like you'd have red, obviously, where you've lived, but a lot of orange, a lot of yellow in different places you've spent.
All through Central South America, through Middle East, through Asia, and it traveling was absolutely the making of me as a young man. I think through traveling, I stopped being a dickhead, or I stopped being so much of a dickhead.
Maybe I should try it a bit more. There you go. We'll see how we go. Can we go back? I'd love to hear some, if you're allowed to talk about like with the armed forces, you're talking about the submarine hunting and
Yes.
the helicopter pilot through Scotland mountains, was it?
Yes.
What sort of missions were you doing? Like what was on there?
well,
Does anything stand out to you?
The anti-submarine warfare stuff, that was all, it was all training, NATO training, and it was a kind of a hangover from the Cold War. We were based in Scotland. Our job ostensibly was to protect the Scottish fleet of submarines that were in Faslane, and I don't think that's a secret, coming down the Clyde. We were there historically to protect them from any potential nasty Russian submarines coming down. So it was really a Cold War hangover. It got a lot more real. I mean, look, and there were some harrowing experiences. I remember my first detachment after coming out of training and going up into the North Sea, and we were on an RFA, which is a fleet auxiliary ship with a couple of helicopters on the back of that. And we were doing these NATO exercises, and one of the biggest storms in 50 years hit. And we were one night probably 60, 80 miles away from the ship doing anti-submarine warfare operations, and then we got called back because of the weather. And I remember coming in, and I was an observer, that's what they call it, which is a tactical navigator. So we'd say the pilots fly the aircraft and we fight the aircraft. So we do all the weapons and all the hunting and stuff. Pilots are just glorified taxi drivers for us, right?
So you were manning the weapons on the helicopter?
Yeah, so we do the hunting. So I'd have an air crewman sitting beside me. He would operate the sonar winch and the sonar buoys. And I would run all the tactics, the warfare tactics, and we'd work in fighting pairs. So it was pretty exciting stuff. But we came in alongside the ship. So what you do is you come alongside the ship and you're traveling along, and then you pop over the deck and pop down. And as we're coming alongside the ship, it was at night, and I thought, I'll just put my window down and have a look, right? Because the pilot was saying, geez, it's pretty twitchy. So we got two pilots up the front, and I put my window down and looked out and thought, there's no ship there. And then all of a sudden, boom, it came into view, right? It's because of the amount of swell, the ship had disappeared as I'd opened the window and then came flying up past my window, and I'm like, nearly shat myself. Put it back up and just sat there and went, I hope to hell we get on here, right? And we had to go around, and then we had a pretty bumpy line. That was pretty twitchy. But I think that the real stuff happened in helicopter search and rescue when I was doing that. By the very nature of it, it can be quite dangerous. Flying in very, very bad weather, picking people off mountains who've fallen off the side of a mountain, or people off a fishing boat or a yacht out at sea. A lot of people, in the islands on a Friday night, glassing each other and having to do Kazovacs in shitty weather. But there was a few pretty harrowing experiences from that. One particularly, where we went out to try and get this guy who had got stuck up a mountain and the weather had closed in. And the weather was so bad that we took off, and we had two very senior guys flying. But to get there, we had to fly over the motorway because of all the lights, because it was so foggy. And we were flying at about, 50 feet maybe. But looking, there was three of us on maps. There was the co-pilot, me sitting on a map, and the air crewman sitting on a map, all tracking where we were to look for the wires across the road, the electricity wires, because we had to fly down, pop over the wires, pop back down again. And that was really twitchy. And then we got to the side of the mountain, and I had to open the back door, and I was hanging out the back door on a dispatcher harness. So was the air crewman, and just conning the aircraft up the mountain because the pilot couldn't see shit. So he's basically operating a joystick, and I'm conning the aircraft up the mountain. Go up 5 yards, go right 3 yards, easy, steady, hold there, go up 2 yards, and just constant for about 2 hours or an hour and a bit up the mountain. Got this guy, got him out, and then had to go back again. And I tell you, when we got back, I felt like I'd run 3 marathons, one after the other. Just because you have to be so switched on every single second. Because one of us made a mistake, 4 people were dead, right? So that's when it gets a bit twitchy.
Hectic. Love it though. It's amazing. I don't think, we're so sheltered in sense of like these things happen and there are people out there that are performing these acts to save people, especially, the way the world is now. Like with social media and the news, you can see so many things, but it's just not something you really hear about too much of, like these big rescues that actually occur.
Yeah, and look, that to be honest wasn't a patch on some of the stuff that guys have experienced in war, right? Yeah. Not a patch on the stuff that these guys have experienced. So, and a lot of that, and that's why you see in our veterans so much PTSD and just all the associated problems, because the human brain's not designed to be exposed to that amount of stress for that period of time.
It's really interesting you say that. We had a podcast recently, Tyler, who was a former police officer, and he actually experienced some really bad PTSD after he finished up with the police force, but he went into the SOGS unit and was doing a lot of like the full-on sort of missions that are pretty big. But a lot of that stuff he actually experienced when he was a young bloke, just as a plainclothes officer in the street. And he just showed that, that level of stress, which I'm actually keen to ask you about now, like how much stress is too much stress and how much is beneficial versus how much is not good?
Yeah, look, the answer is it depends. Yeah. It depends on the individual. It depends on the nature of the stressor and the duration of the stressor and the intensity, right? So one bit of stress exposure that might actually make one person even more resilient can break another person. And this is why I'm such a big fan of bringing up our kids in the right manner, because I think we have well-intentioned our attitudes, well-intentioned attitudes to try and keep our kids safe, that are actually denying them the ability to enhance their resilience, right? So a lot of resilience actually comes from, and I actually prefer the term hardiness, because resilience it's an outcome, but it doesn't tell us how to get there, whereas hardiness actually tells us how to get there and can be learned, right? And it's through that manageable overload. So the analogy I will use is you in your training, right? So as you are, as a sportsman or any time of an athlete or anybody going into the gym, right? If you were to go in on day one and try and deadlift 200 kilos, it would just completely bust you. But you start low and then you have that progressive overload, right? That's a fundamental principle in exercise science, is that you need to progressively overload the system in order to continue to stimulate adaptation, right? But the gap can't be too much, right? And that's where it comes back to the individual. So one individual who has been pretty sheltered, then being exposed to moderate stress might crush that individual, whereas somebody else who's been exposed to different types of stressors builds up their capacity to deal with stress. And that same exact exposure can actually take them to another level. Right? And I learned through combat survival and resistance to interrogation training, which was 10 days of pretty hardcore shit. But afterwards, I realized that stuff that used to stress me out no longer stressed me out.
So was that with the armed forces?
That was with the armed forces.
So can you talk us through that? That's really, really interesting, because I think we can all probably relate to, as you get older, you think, fuck, why was I worrying about that thing I was 5 years ago?
That's right.
But on a bigger level.
Yes.
How did that help you, and what actually took place with that?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost to call out how the military views these things, there's this beautiful term, stress inoculation training. That's what they call it. And if we think about it, you think about how vaccines work, is you get a small dose of the disease or the condition that then strengthens your immune system to deal with the bigger dose. And that's what combat survival and resistance to interrogation training was. It was designed for soldiers or paramilitary personnel who would operate behind enemy lines. So special forces guys and aircrew tend to be the ones who do combat survival and resistance to interrogation training. So when we did it, it was 10 days and it was pretty hardcore stuff back in 1997. In those 10 days, we got no food. We did get some food. We got a chicken between 4 people, and it was alive when we got it. And that was the only food we got for 10 days. We got a physical thrashing every single day to wear us down. We had very little sleep. It was in the middle of winter in the UK. We had no sleeping bags. We had a Gore-Tex bivy bag that keeps you dry, but there's no heat in it. And we were just subjected to stressor upon stressor upon stressor. And those first 5 days were the static phase where they were teaching us survival skills in with wearing us down physically. And then the second 5 days was escape and evasion, where we were hunted by a hunter force who had vehicles and dog teams and were told that if they caught us, they could give us a bit of a kicking. And we got bumped on day 9, and our team got split up. 2 of us got away, 2 got captured. And me and this other guy eventually made it to the end. And then when we thought it was all over, we got introduced to what they call the shock of capture, which is a bunch of paratroopers jumping out of nowhere, giving you a bit of a kicking, bagging and tagging you. So bagging is a Hessian sack over your head, hands tied behind your back, and then just separated, put down on the ground. I had my hands tied to my feet in a way that if you struggle, it gets worse. And then they just buggered off and left me for, I don't know, it felt like it was hours, but it was probably half an hour just to start me messing with my own head. You know, you think this is all over. 10 days, you know, they'd say you have a prize, you get a Mars bar, and we never actually got the Mars bar. But this whole thing of dislocation of expectation. So we're out on day 1, they told us that at the end of this thing, you're going to get dinner. And then dinner never came, right? And then it was like, oh, forget about that. We're going to do a navigation exercise overnight instead of dinner. And then we were told breakfast was coming and it doesn't come, right? So this dislocation of expectation, I think everybody who's got a parent can recognize this. Like, I was told I was going to get this and then it never happened. That stresses people out, right? But this was continuous dislocation of expectation. And then all the uncertainty, like what the hell's going on? Then we got dragged up. I heard this dog going crazy. I had my Hessian sack pulled off and an Alsatian trying to bite my face off. Now, it was on a short lead with a handler, but all you can see is teeth, right? That activates the stress response system, I can tell you. But then we were all put in a van, hooted, and then driven around for a few hours and then taken out one by one, and nobody spoke, which was really eerie. If any of us spoke, we got a whack and nobody talked to us, right? And again, that's to unsettle you. And then they dragged us out one by one, tied our hands together and cut our laces out and dragged us around by our thumbs. And I remember getting dragged up this building, this big, heavy iron door got opened, and the first thing I noticed was the noise. White noise when the radio's off station. This room had white noise at the volume you'd hear music in a nightclub, right? And I was hooded and then put in stress positions, which are pretty friggin' horrible. Like after a minute, they start to hurt. After 3 or 4 minutes, they're agony. Anytime you move, somebody hit you a whack and put you back in a stress position. Then when you collapse, they put you in another stress position. And that's where I spent about the next 12 to 15 hours in there with that white noise. And still, my wife will tell you, the ongoing argument in our house is about the ceiling fan, because I cannot stand ceiling fans, bathroom fans, kitchen fans. If one is on, I'll walk into a room and I'll just feel a bit of unease, and then I'll realize the fan's on, I turn it off, I'm like, oh, that's amazing, right? That's the one negative, I think, from that experience. But every now and then we were dragged out and interrogated, right? And the interrogators were obviously not very pleasant. And they were just telling us a story of what was going on. We were in Iraq. We were shot down. My co-pilot was down. My pilot was down the room. They captured him. If I didn't talk, they were going to torture him, right? And in my head, I'm going, this is just a game. It's just a game. And then at some point, maybe, 8, 9 hours in, I actually had a vivid memory of the helicopter crash that they told me happened that actually never happened. And that completely spun me out. And then I'm like, geez, it's bullshit. You're in a training exercise. And I had to just keep telling myself, this is a training, this will end. And I ended up doing it minute by minute, just counting down the minutes. And then when it was all over, it was a bit of a relief, I can tell you right now. But a couple of things really stayed with me. One was that after that, stuff that used to stress me out no longer stressed me out, right? And look, we got a debrief from the military psychologist. The guys, we were introduced to the guys who interrogated us. They were military interrogators. So they did a very good job of debriefing us and telling us where we went wrong and what we should do and all of that. But the other thing that happened, there was a guy on that course who I'd gone through flying training with, and he wasn't physically very capable, and people used to bag him out a little bit, because he was a bit wet as well. He was a dour Scottish guy. They're all friggin' dour, the Scots. But he was complaining about his blisters right from the get-go, and everyone was like, mate, shut up, everybody's got blisters. And then at the end of it, when it was all over and I was in the room and everybody's just sitting there feeling sorry for themselves, right? There's not much chat going on. And he waddled into the room and went, that wasn't too bad, was it? And everybody's jaw hit the floor. And then he sat down and he was like, fuck, my blisters. And I'm like, here we go again. And then he took his boot off and took his sock off and he had a blister on his heel all the way through to the bone. And I remember looking at that and him coming in and going, that wasn't too bad. And in my head, I went, never, ever judge anybody again until you've been through the absolute ringer with them. Because you do not know what someone is like until you've seen into their soul, until you've gone through real hardship. And he showed a side that I never thought he had in him, right? And that was such a lesson for me, just not to judge people.
Powerful message. So prior in, were you thinking, oh, this bloke's weak as piss?
I thought,
like,
he's weak as piss. He's never going to get through flying training. He's never going to get through this course. He's a friggin' liability. And he wasn't. Not when the chips were down.
Far out. That is so good. Through this as well, so you come through, and I know that it's called, what was it called? Stress
inoculation training.
Stress inoculation training. So obviously that's already identified that that's what you're going to be doing in the course. Did you... Where are you on this, your journey yet of understanding how important stress is? Was that sort of the opening?
I think it is absolutely. Look, at that point, I kind of knew, because I'd had a master's degree in exercise science. Yeah. I knew from an exercise perspective,
it's important.
It's only good for exercise is only good for you because it's a stressor. Yeah, and it stimulates adaptive responses in the body. Yeah. It was after that course that I realized, boom, light bulb moment.
Wow.
Psychological emotional stress is the same thing, right? And it's about progressive overload, right? If you try to avoid stress, you erode your capacity to deal with stress. And this is for every parent that I want to tell them. You need to expose your kids to manageable stressors and not save them, to let them feel and then be around to pick them up, dust them off, and help them to learn the lessons, right? And I think, as I talked to my wife about this, bringing up kids in a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. And I said, how do we bring up resilient kids? And she vetoed my first suggestion, which was to take them through kiddie version of combat survival and resistance to interrogation training. But we agreed on sport. And we sat our kids down when they were 4 and 8 and said to them, you guys both have to do a team sport and a martial art. And we will take you to try all the different things. And they both just landed on soccer and karate. Mm-hmm. And we said to them, that's just the house rules. And you can stop at any point, but you need to find somewhere else to live.
Yeah.
All right. So, and it's been the best thing for my kids.
Well, it's the biggest form nearly, and I don't know, maybe I'm a new parent, so I don't often get in discussions with other ones, but I do realise, even in my short journey, how opinionated different parents are around these things. And it's fucking tough to even have a conversation about stuff. But it's a biggest form of love for you. It's a way of showing love, where I think some people think it's actually not. But even, just really small things. I think about this stuff a lot, and this is why I love your work that you do. Everything I'm doing now for my own health, and I think a lot of dads that maybe reach out to me and talk about the topics we do, it's honestly just to show my kids good habits and see where they're going. And
they don't so much do what you say, they do what you do.
You do. And I love taking my son to the skate park.
Yeah,
because
nice.
I grew up at a skate park, and I think it's similar to sport in the sense of you fall over, you're going to hurt yourself. But you get up, you learn risks, you do all these things. And I don't take mum with me anymore when we go because it's sort of, you
wouldn't be allowed to do
It's caused a few
things.
but his favourite thing to do is to go to the skate park with me because I just let him go and do his, and I'm not going to hurt him, like, do his stuff. And there's levels of where he can go with it, but I love that part of it. And then even the biggest part was, I've spoken about this before, I reckon it was honestly like makes me emotional thinking about it because I just love this time was when I realised why I was trying to stay healthy wasn't for me in sense, it was for other things, but to be the best version of myself is going to help other people as well, was when I grew up, and I was talking about that person before, and I think a lot of people might be like this, but I probably never had my dad played footy as well, but by the time I was born, he was well and truly finished, wasn't really training anymore, and that's just where he was at with his life. And I remember going away with my brother-in-law, who's a ripper. He will love this podcast more than anyone, by the way. We're so into this stuff together. But I remember we went for a run, and my son was maybe one. He is not too old yet. He's got an older son, and they were watching us get ready for a run, and they're like, "Oh, we want to come. What's mum and dad? What's dad's? What are they doing?" And then my wife and sister-in-law were like, "Oh, the boys are going for a run. They're going to the gym." And I just remember them watching us, and I was like, this is fucking awesome. Like, they're watching this. They want to do this.
Yeah.
And now I go outside in my little gym outside and I do my chin-ups, and like my son, like, I make him do them with him, and he wants to do it all. It's just the best.
It's brilliant. At the CrossFit gym that I train at, I often mostly train at 9:30, and there's mums in there, and they bring the little kids in, and the little kids are there doing the running around wanting to do all the exercises, and it's so critical. But the stuff that you're talking about at the skate park, and I talk about my good mate Professor Grant Schofield, who I am. We're starting a lab together called the Hardiness Lab.
I love it. I'm signing up. When do we do that?
Yeah, but he talks about raising free range kids rather than battery kids.
Okay.
And we're raising battery kids at the minute. The analogies with the chickens. When your son's out in the skate park, and he's going, do I go down this scary looking jump? He's having to evaluate risk and reward in his brain, right? That is what develops the frontal lobes, right? Is that evaluation of risk and reward, climbing a tree, falling out of a tree, right? Breaking an arm. When that happened to my little girl, she was on the monkey bars and fell off and broke an arm. I'm like, that's freaking great, because she's just evaluated risk and reward, right? And it's a lesson that they actually learn. Now, hopefully they don't have to break limbs to learn every lesson, but that is so important. And what they're now seeing is that the frontal lobes are developing much later than they were hundreds of years ago, right? And even probably since pre-COVID, there are now changes in brain development from kids who went through COVID and were in that vacuum through COVID. So the key thing is our kids need to be exposed to manageable stressors. And that word is pretty key. Manageable with that progressive overload. That's how you learn anything, right? That's how you learn at school. It gets progressively more difficult. When we were doing flying training, every flight that we did, there was a simulator flight in the sim beforehand where the instructor would throw curveballs in there and stuff like that. And then in the air, you did the same thing. There was more complexity in the air, and it got more and more complex. And if you ever failed a flight, they brought you back down a level to reconsolidate, right? That's the model that we need for life and developing life skills, is that exposure to progressive overload of stress, because it builds your capacity, right? We can't avoid stressors, and we shouldn't avoid stressors. What we need to do is build our capacity to deal with stressors. And there's something called the cross-stressor effect, not cross-dresser. That's what I used to do occasionally on nights out in the military 20 years ago when you're allowed to. But cross-stressor is that if I regularly expose myself to the stress of exercise, not only does it enhance my ability to deal with that stress, but it enhances my ability to deal with other stress. That's why I'm a big fan of more intense exercise for people, because what most people don't realize, it's the exact same system that is activated through physical stress as emotional and psychological stress. And we can train our stress response system globally. And that's why I think intense exercise is so important. Sport is so important for kids. They learn about rights and wrongs, and that life's not fair, that somebody cheats, and they're learning those lessons, right? And I love the idea of kids doing both a martial art and a team sport. Martial art for that discipline, the respect. All my kids' teachers have said they're so respectful, and it's because of the dojo, right? And being exposed to that whole process, and then having to earn the belts, right? Whereas now on sports day, everybody gets a fucking prize. That pisses me off, right? It's like we have to learn that you have to work at things, and there'll be setbacks along the way, and people have to learn to deal with stressors and setbacks. But having an adult around that can pick them up and dust them off, and I'm sure you will do the same. Kid falls over in a skate park. Some parents will run over and go, oh my God, and the kid goes, bursts into massive tears. Other parents will go, you'll be right, get up. Yeah. And they'll have a little bit of cry, but then they'll get up and they'll go. It's when we fuss over them.
To you, yeah.
Absolutely. And if mom or dad is running over and go, oh my God, are you okay? There'll be the hysterics. But it's teaching them, these are little things that accumulate over time.
Well, it's even like, for anything to do with emotional regulation, I suppose, too. Like we, run a business and things happen here, and me and my business partners, Bordy and Zach, we always say, look, if we're stressing, everyone else is going to stress. But if we don't panic, no one else panics. It's the same things that you give off.
It spreads like a cancer, right? And I've got this little thing. When shit happens, I quickly go, is anyone dead or is anyone pregnant?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, it's generally okay. And when you've got a 19-year-old daughter and a 55-year-old wife, that second question's really important.
Fair enough. So many little bits there, and I hope I can remember them all. One was just about the manageable stresses.
Yes.
What was the correct term that you used?
Progressive overload.
Progressive overload. So I think what's really important about that I found was, if I reflect on my own story just for a second, was like I didn't have any progressive overload of stresses, right? So when I hit 21 and got faced with a big problem that wasn't manageable, that made it really fucking hard to learn those lessons. And that's what I think a lot about now.
Yes.
And since then, it's been progressive. And those things, if they're manageable stresses or they're predetermined and we're actually training ourselves to do them, when the ones that we're not training and they just fucking happen, like a shit has happened and has happened to everyone, then I found I can deal with those ones a little bit better because of the warm up, I suppose, to getting them.
So I'll give you something that's really important here. A quote from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus from 2,000 years ago. We must all undergo a hard winter training and not enter into lightly that for which we have not prepared. And he was talking about life. The Stoics realized that life is hard. Buddha, the first noble truth of Buddhism, life is suffering. That's actually a mistranslation. Dukkha doesn't mean suffering, it means hard to do. Life is hard to do, right? And if life is hard, you need to prepare yourself for that eventuality, right? And if we're not preparing ourselves by actually doing hard things, when that big thing happens, often we then collapse. And that's what we see a lot now with this generation that's come through, particularly post-COVID, where they were mollycoddled a lot, and all other kids who have just been mollycoddled, you're just destroying their capacity. But the other thing I wanted to bring up on this is your view of a stressor has a massive impact on two things. Number one, your physiology, and secondly, how you deal with that stressor. So say me and you are exposed to the exact same piece of adversity. If I view it as a threat, and I start to think about all the bad things that will happen and the loss and woe is me and all of that, it activates something called the HPA axis, which is the severe part of the stress response, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland producing cortisol. You may have heard of the major stress hormone. But if you view that same thing as a challenge, it activates your SAM axis, the fight or flight that you'll know of, fight, flight, or freeze, but it's the fight part, right? So in what happens to the two of us, you become motivated because of that adrenaline and noradrenaline chemicals. You become motivated. You tend to approach it head on, right? You've got higher levels of dopamine released in the brain to get you into action. But because of the cortisol coming over the top of the adrenaline, I go into avoidance, procrastination, run away from it, try to hide. And from a physiological perspective, the hormones, the stress hormones that are activated in you, the adrenaline and noradrenaline, have a half-life of 1 to 2 minutes. So that means 1 to 2 minutes later, they're in half. So after about 5 or 6 minutes, they're negligible. Your body is now back to homeostasis or equilibrium, whereas cortisol has a half-life of 1 to 2 hours. So that means 4 or 5 hours later, I still have significant amount of stress hormones coursing through my body, attacking my organs, attacking my brain. Long-term high cortisol is what drives depression. It's what drives lots of mental health issues. It destroys your brain. It makes you fat. It makes you sick. And it causes lots of chronic diseases, right? In the short term, it acts as a SWAT team, right? But if you just psychologically view something as a threat, you're activating that part and actually having a negative effect on your physiology that persists for hours, as well as making you avoid, procrastinate, those sorts of things. So the view that we take of stressors is hugely, hugely important.
It's amazing. It's so relevant for me. I'll probably get goosebumps right now, but not to get too personal into it, my story, but like I'm in that zone. Like I understand what you're talking about, but I think I've the last little bit, we talk about stressors, right? And if you don't put yourself under stress, stress will find you. Oh yeah. And like I had this sort of period where I just got hit by 6. I wasn't looking after myself. This was before my son was born. And it was almost like the world was telling me like something's coming. You need to get yourself in order because this is going to be a big change in your life. So I just got hit with like this anxiety that just floored me. Like I couldn't even leave the house. Like it was just, my body basically just shut down. Like I could not move. And I got back into a better routine, working out, those sort of things. You get lazy again. About to have my second child, bang, happened again. And it was almost like my buddy saying, like, you need to get into these situations of looking after yourself physically so that mentally and all these things can sort of flow in together. But what's been really sort of interesting is, like, I've read this book, Dare. It's a really good book around anxiety too. And it's annoying because I understand what's happening, but I'm slowly trying to like build these strengths and habits. And in my own head is like, when I have these moments, it's the same as like if I'm jumping out of a plane, but it's how I perceive it, right? One's a threat, one's enjoyment. Yep. And I'm probably just stuck in this loop.
Same situation.
Yeah, stuck in this loop at the moment of I know I'm there, but I just need to be able to come back.
And this is why that we have to do hard stuff, right? I always say there's 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and shit sandwiches from the universe. Yeah. Right? And that whole story, you've got to prepare yourself. Now, if we come back to the challenge and threat response, it's much easier to get into a challenge response. And actually, we can only really do that if we feel like we have the resources to be able to deal with the stressor. Yeah. So that's that progressive overload. But it's also, if you haven't done hard things in your life, the first time that big shit sandwich comes along from the universe, you're not prepared for it, right? I'll give you a little personal story. In January the 20th this year, I went through open heart surgery because I play soccer with a cardiologist and said to him, I'm in my 50s, mate. I want to get a full checkup. And he did all the tests, came back, and he said, and he talked about looking at the rooms, the plumbing, the electrics. And he said, fitness-wise, you're great. He says, but we just found that you were born with a dodgy aortic valve. I have had a bicuspid aortic valve rather than tricuspid. And he said, eventually that will kill you or give you heart failure. So you've got to have open heart surgery. And he said, go home and think about it. We don't have to do it right now, but sometime in the next 3 to 4 years, we got to do it. And I actually just said to him, book me in. And I walked out of there, and I'm a big fan of the Stoic philosophers. And the words of Seneca, as I was walking to my car, I'll never forget it, burned in my ears. I pity the man who has not faced adversity, because he has not faced a worthy opponent, and no one, not even him, knows what he is capable of, right? So I drove straight home, and I wrote on my bathroom mirror, "Worthy opponent," right? And I wrote a training program for me to rise to meet my worthy opponent. And as I was driving home, I remember a conversation with a mate of mine who's ex-Lieutenant Colonel Special Forces in Australia, who led the SAS into the first Gulf War in Kuwait. He was one of the first Australian into that war. And one day I was having coffee with him, and I said, "Mate, how did you feel going to war?" Because I never went to war. And he said, obviously there was a bit of nerves, but he said the overwhelming feeling was a perverse sense of excitement, because this is what I had trained for. This was what everything was about. And I actually thought, as I drove home, I'm going to borrow that attitude, because you get to choose how you respond to your circumstances. And as I was driving home, I said, this worthy opponent is what I've trained for. This is what my military service was about. This is what my combat survival and resistance to interrogation training, all the ice baths, the CrossFit sessions, had been to train me to meet my worthy opponent. And I now get to choose the arena. And I have 6 months to get myself in the best shape to meet my worthy opponent. And I'm going to use my worthy opponent to drive me on. And I actually wrote an article for LinkedIn about why I'm embracing my upcoming open heart surgery, because it was going to make me better, make me rise to that next level. And so we all get to choose how we respond to our circumstances. But that challenge response and in calculating that in your DNA, that whenever you face with stressors, you go, right, this is a challenge. What do I need to do? This is a worthy opponent that I need to get all my resources to meet it. That attitude we can actually learn. And that attitude then serves us well in our physiology, our motivation, the approach, all of that stuff.
So, mate, I really appreciate you sharing that. That's like, I'm going to take that one. You can take the heat map.
Cool.
I'm going to use.
We'll
I'm going to use
heat
yours.
map and worthy opponent.
It's really interesting you say that, because not that I've ever heard anyone approach a situation like that before, but with these situations, and again, for people listening out there, you sometimes forget this isn't just us talking about our own stories, but like trying to relate to them. I've got when I have been with these situations, yes, they've been incredibly challenging, as I imagine being told you have to have open heart surgery would be as well. There are parts of panic and things that aren't uncomfortable about it. But what I have been proud that I have done from that is I look at myself prior to that and where I am now, like the wealth of knowledge I've learned about my body and who I am and where I want to go to and the dad I want to be. Like without those panic and things, I wouldn't have changed.
Yeah.
And yes, it's fucking shit going through it, or it's a great opportunity going through it. But even this really cool, exciting thing I wanted to tell you about that I'm doing over the next sort of 6 to 12 months now is working with a team at Salt Lab. I don't know if you've heard of Salt Lab. They're building this really cool facility where I'm going to get like my full bloods sort of done. So I had some blood work done.
Yeah.
Then I went and saw this amazing doctor, Dr. Izzy. I need to connect you guys up. It'd be fucking amazing. And doing my full bloods and getting like the hormones and all that stuff sort of looked at so we can sort of tailor a program to be able to build more stress in your life, but also supplement the things that you might be deficient in that can be holding you back as well.
Yeah.
Because I know with the nutrition, and there was a really cool quote that you spoke about in the Future Lab podcast was around, what you're putting in your body is going to end up being your health physically and mentally as well. So sort of getting your base sorted can really set you up. And I don't think without that setback, I would have had this outlook to actually build up for the worthy opponent that we all have.
And one thing on the setbacks, right, is that, and again, this is the Stoic philosophers. They said that when you're faced with big challenges that you can't control, they just become an opportunity to practice a virtue or to sharpen your character. And the Stoics were big on character, arete. They said that's all you need for the good life. But if you look at the ancient Greek origins of the word character, it basically translates loosely as the mark of a chisel. And I love that shit, right? And I like to talk to people, all that hard shit that's happened to you in your life, right? even the bad stuff, you shouldn't like forget about it or squash it down. You should wear that shit like marks of a chisel, right? Wear it with pride like tattoos, because that's the stuff that has shaped your character, right?
Fascinating. Do you know, I didn't want to bring it up before because I didn't want you to think it was weird, but have you seen the movie The Guardian?
No.
You haven't seen it with Ashton
no.
Kutcher and Kevin Costner. Fantastic. Anyway, it's a movie about they're in the Navy and they go and save people in helicopters, and you should watch it. It's very good. But the lady in the show talks about how a lot of people want to cover up scars or anything. It's like, they're earned. Like, you've actually got to wear them as pride. Like wrinkles, it shows that you've had stress.
That's
like,
right.
Scars
You got
show
experience.
that you've got experience. Like if you come out of life and you're perfect, like you haven't really done much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. What would you, back just to that point around stress, we talked a lot about kids before around developing the prefrontal cortex with stress, and that's what sort of gets you to build resilience. What about people now that are 30 years old, that are 25 years old, that are 35, 40 years old? Can we still develop that part of our brain?
100%.
How do we do it?
Everybody can still develop. Not so much your prefrontal cortex, but how you respond and react. We can absolutely develop that. We can develop our challenge muscle, right? For sure, by deliberately doing these things. But one thing that's really important as well that I want to bring in here, and this is when I talk about hardiness, right? So there's 30 years of research around hardiness and so much benefits. And it's 3 orientation: or control, orientation, challenge, and commitment, right? Control is I deeply believe that I heavily influence my destiny and my environment, and I focus on the stuff that I can control. Challenge is I view change as opportunities to learn and grow, and I lean into adversity with the right attitude. And then commitment is a being fully engaged in life and feeling that there's a sense of meaning and purpose, and being committed to your own well-being. Now, I have, as part of my PhD, added the physiological hardiness component, because nature has developed things like cold exposure, heat exposure, exercise, all activate these stress response genes that then trigger the activation of, in case of humans, hundreds of protective genes that make us tougher, right? Or hardier, right? So, but one of the fundamentals I always talk about, right? If you want to optimize yourself and how you deal with stress, you got to get the fundamentals right. You've got to provide the substrates for your body and brain to operate really well. And you'll know as an elite sportsman, you needed to exercise, but you need to sleep well, you need good nutrition, you need hydration, you need recovery, you need breath work, all of those things. And this is what we all need. And when I work with executives, I like, you have to, in the times when you are really stressed, when you're telling me I don't have time to exercise, that's when you have to make time for exercise. That's when your diet has to be the best, because your body needs the resources. That's when you have to get your fucking phone out of the room and have good sleep hygiene, to do your breath work, to do your hot, your cold, because you need to create the conditions necessary for your body to operate optimally. And it's much more important that we do that in times of big stress. But what we tend to do is we come back, elite athletes, if you're in the finals and you're having to get up again and again for a game, or at a World Cup or whatever, and every 3 days you got a game, they're coming back, they're doing all the recovery, all of that stuff. Whereas a lot of us come back and go, fucking hell, that was a hard week. I need a drink, right? And we eat shit food and veg out in front of the TV. That ain't recovery, that's relaxation. So particularly when you know you're going into times of stress, that's when the fundamentals need to be right around exercise, nutrition, mindset, and recovery. Those 4 fundamentals are absolutely key. I think that's the thing we haven't talked about in order to be able to deal with stress and to switch what could tip you over the edge to what will keep you in peak performance. And I use the analogy, you'll like this one, overtraining syndrome. You'll be familiar with that, right? There's a tightrope, a very small tightrope that elite athletes are working optimal peak performance on this side And just on the other side of the tightrope is overtraining syndrome. And it's a vortex that drags them down, right? And that is a line that a lot are walking every single day. Anybody who's a peak performer is walking that line. And as you will well know, most of the improvements in sporting performance in the last 5 to 10 years haven't been through training. It's been through the quality of recovery and all the science around recovery. So for me, you need to provide all of those raw substrates for your body and brain to optimally operate, especially in times of stress.
Amazing. So good. It's been a big one, even working with psychiatrists, psychologists, like those 4 pillars are the biggest ones, like using it as a bit of a pyramid. Like if you don't have a base, you're going to fall over.
You can't build a $5 million house on sand foundations.
No. There you go. What about other things that can help us build? So we just say we have our 4 manageable and they're in a good space. We're doing those 4 things. What would you suggest for people out there to do generically to be able to build and put themselves?
So the other C that I have added to hardiness, the control orientation, challenge orientation, commitment orientation, is connection.
Connection, okay.
Loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking 10 to 20 cigarettes a day, right? Our brain is a social organ. We need connection, and not having 3,000 followers on Instagram or friends on Facebook. We need human to human deep connection. That's what we all need to feel like we're a member of a tribe. And so surrounding yourself with people that you connect with deeply is really, really important. And the research shows that this can be so powerful, but you've got to be seeing them face to face at least once a month, right? And having those meaningful connections. I think that's a hugely important thing. And the other thing that I would say that's coming out really strong in the research is actually spending time in nature. And I think as a society, we have gone away from all of that. Like there's actually a whole heap of science that I used to think was woo-woo horse shit that actually, we now know robust science that you spend time in nature, it reduces your inflammation, it helps how you deal with stress, it has positive effects on your gene expression, it has a positive impact on your microbiome, all of those things that build that ecosystem, right? So they would be, for me, the 2 major things is that having those deep, meaningful connections and making sure that you spend some time in nature, right? And I shifted actually, and it was my wife that triggered me to do it, just around mindfulness. She's more into that than me, because I take my dogs out for a walk in the morning and a walk in the evening when I'm around at home. And I used to go out and listen to music or listen to podcasts, and I'll think, I'm doing productive stuff. And it was just through her urging. She just said, why don't you just go out and be present? And I actually love going out around sunrise with my dogs and just listening to all the birds. I live in the bubble down in Mount Eliza, but it's just amazing walking, listening to the birds, looking at the changing light, walking past the ocean. Kookaburras, man. Fucking how good are kookaburras? When kookaburras say, I just have the biggest shit-eating grin whenever I hear kookaburras, right? And there's kookaburras around on my morning walk, and it just, it just makes my friggin' day. But that just being present, seeing my dogs happy as a pig in shit, running around sniffing stuff, and just noticing all the stuff around me, it's actually really, really powerful.
Yeah. Man, I love your passion for life. I don't think I've ever had a guest on that I've genuinely just wanted, I suppose in a non-weird way, I just want to emulate what you're doing. Like, I absolutely love it, and I think there's going to be so many people out there listening that want to run through a fucking brick wall after listening. But I think the main part about
just
that...
make it a small brick wall and then build to the bigger one.
Yeah,
right?
We'll build the hardiness. But I think with that, in saying motivation is... I've had this weird relationship with motivation. It's not a great... I don't really like measuring motivation because it goes away very quickly. It's got to come back to just habits and discipline. Motivation can probably help you start, but after that, it's just got to be something that you just continue to do even when you're not motivated.
Can I give you my take on motivation?
Please do. You hate it?
Motivation follows action.
There you go.
Not the other way around. There are so many people sitting out there waiting for the motivation fairy to come along and give them a big dollop of motivation, and then they'll get started. There's now a whole heap of neuroscience experiments that show that when your brain knows that you're in forwards motion towards a goal, that's when it releases dopamine, right? Dopamine's the chemical of motivation. It's the chemical of more, more, more. So when you eat a Tim Tam, you know what a Tim Tam is?
Yep.
Right? And all the British people will be going, it's not a Tim Tam, it's a fucking penguin.
Yeah.
Right? But anyway, we'll leave that to the side for the minute. When you eat a Tim Tam, there are chemicals in your brain that are going, oh, this is lovely. Dopamine is going, where's the rest of the packet? Right? It's the chemical of more, more, more. When you're drinking a glass of wine, it wants to know where the next bottle is, right? And so how you build motivation is you get a plan and you start acting. And I'm a big fan of ticking off rituals. So I have a ritual board where I write the things that I need to do, the process. Process beats goals every day of the week. You'll know that as an athlete, right? But when you write it on a board that's visual, it's a trigger to do that. I call it a ritual board. It's a trigger to do that behavior. And then when you tick it off, you're actually telling your brain that you're making forward steps towards your goal. And that's what releases dopamine. Motivation follows action, not the other way around. You want the motivation fairy to come, start acting.
So good. You're talking before about what you're building with the hardiness
lab.
Yeah. When's that sort of coming? What's going to be involved in it?
Just about to. So me and Grant,
Yeah.
both big fans, right? I've just written a book called The Hardiness Edge,
Yeah.
which will be out in a number of months. He's written a book called Choose Your Heart.
Yeah, love
right.
it. Yeah.
And we are both we're like brothers from another mother.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
He's a Kiwi guy, and he's a professor of public health, but he is just over the whole bullshit in universities and stuff like that. So he's now an emeritus professor. But we are starting this hardiness lab that is basically going to be doing research around the benefits of hardiness for things like mental health and longevity. And look, we know just for anybody that's out there, if anybody is interested in this stuff, there are nutrients called Hardy's Daily Essentials. That's a Canadian company.
Yeah.
I have no affiliation with them. Well, I do actually. They give me a discount, which I pass on to people.
Yeah.
At 25.
Hardy's, like
Hardy's, HARDYS.
Yeah.
Hardy's Daily Essentials. So they have these nutrients that are specifically designed to support the brain and nervous system, right? So I just want to talk a little bit, if you're happy
Please
about the physiology of what's happening. So what we know, what Professor Mark Horowitz and others, and me included, and Grant Schofield will say is that most depression is caused by chronic stress, right? And it basically attacks your brain. Now, what we know is that when you're chronically stressed, Professor Bruce Ames, his triage theory shows that your body robs your brain and nervous system of nutrients to provide stress hormones, because stress hormones are survival. They are prioritized over everything in the body, and it will rob your brain and nervous system. So you end up with a brain that's depleted because of the stress. And that's when depression and anxiety really can come in and set into people. So what they actually need is they need to provide real dense nutrients for the brain and nervous system. And Hardy's have a number of randomized controlled trials, right? Even where they put people on a placebo, and they actually give them a placebo that turns the color of their urine orange, because when you're on vitamins, it'll change the color of your pee, right? So they even go down to that detail. And what they show is that their nutrients are at least as effective as antidepressants, right? And so they're an alternative for people. But if somebody is on an antidepressant, you can then start to take Hardy's, and I would highly recommend. But you will talk to their clinicians, and they will advise you or your doctor, because what the nutrients do is they potentiate the effects of the antidepressants. So you might have to slowly decrease the dose. But anyway, you talk to their experts. But it has to be, for me, that holistic approach of, yes, you can use the antidepressant to help you to get through, but then you need to now nourish your brain. It needs extra love right now. So you need to nourish it with the nutrients, trying to make sure that you're then doing the exercise. Cold exposure can be really, really good, right? Short bursts of cold water therapy, massively increased noradrenaline and dopamine, right? That can be feel-good chemicals, but also that human connection, a good diet, right? Making sure you're having a nutrient-dense diet. And all of this stuff gets harder when you've got depression because your motivation tends to go. But that's the kind of holistic approach that I think that people need to help them to get out of the hole, if you like.
Couldn't agree more. Amazing insight. With the work that you do, how can people access more to that? Say today someone wants to, obviously you work with a lot of executives and business people, so I'm assuming that's a route, but is there any other way that we can, your book, podcast?
Yeah, so my website is kind of the repository for everything.
And we'll have that link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's paultaylor.biz. My podcast is the Paul Taylor podcast, highly original.
Yep, makes sense.
Indeed. But yeah, I do lots of corporate speaking. I work everything from keynotes to 2-day workshops. I work with leadership teams around building hardiness for them and their organizations and do a whole range of keynotes. I've got a book, Death by Comfort, another one coming out called The Hardiness Effect. And actually me and my wife are currently working with a school in Victoria to develop a curriculum, a hardiness curriculum for kids.
Amazing.
That's what we're just so passionate about.
When's the book out?
The book will be out in November.
Great. Well, I would love to get you back in and we'll chat about that book when it comes back out.
Would love to.
Yeah, Paul, I genuinely can't thank you enough for your time today, mate. That has felt like about a 3-minute chat, but it's gone for a long time. And yeah, I've learned a lot and going to go put it into action now.
Awesome. I love it, mate.
Thank you, mate.
Cheers.